Round 13 is in the books, ladies and gentlemen, but wasn't without controversy that has divided the AFL community. So today, not only do we reflect on round 13 and those outcomes, but we lock in our tips for round 14 and yet another round of the buys. Sit back, relax, let's get this one underway. All the action kicked off on Thursday night with Sydney hosting St Kilda at the SCG in a game where, even though I have openly spoken about St Kilda's defensive structure and their run and carry, I really thought Sydney had the chance to rise to the occasion here, especially for the milestone man Lance Franklin playing game 350. But that wasn't the case, and even though there were some moments where Sydney were able to wrestle things back a little bit, I felt St Kilda had the momentum throughout the entire game. It really wasn't a game that ever looked like it was fully going to shift from St Kilda's favour into Sydney's favour. And I think one of the biggest things that played into that outcome was the tackle that we saw Dan Butler lay on Nick Blakey that saw Nick Blakey subbed out of the game. Now, everybody assumed it was through concussion because the tackle did result in Blakey hitting his head on the ground. And even the commentary team said that he had failed his HIA, his head injury assessment. So everybody just assumed that was the case. It was then revealed later on in the post-game press conference that it was more so an ankle injury that had forced him out of the game. And this is where the talking points of the weekend began, because Dan Butler's tackle was such a great example of how a run down from behind tackle should be executed. It was just incidental that the head made contact with the ground, but there was no secondary motion, there was no intent to harm, there was no maliciousness in the tackle. It was just a tackle, grab the player from behind, take him to ground. It's what everybody is taught to do when you play football, especially at a junior level. So that went to the tribunal tonight, and it has been cleared officially, so he is free to play. And it didn't even deserve the 1 week that they were going to offer, and I think they only offered him 1 week because the head hit the ground and they're trying to eliminate that from the game, which I do understand. But at the end of the day, that now puts a question mark under every single tackle that is going to be laid. And the media beat up that these tackles are now starting to, bring to the surface is just so instrumental in how the game is now being pushed and being perceived by the crowd. And people are now openly saying that they don't feel like going to the football anymore or supporting their teams via memberships anymore, because the state of the game is at its worst, umpire-wise, MRO-wise, this season, on the back of having an additional field umpire added to the ground. So we went from 3 field umpires to 4. That hasn't seemed to make anything better. If anything, my personal opinion, it's made shit worse. The MRO keeps spinning a wheel to determine how long people are going to sit out for. Now, we're going to get into that with some of the later games in round 13. But this game, although it had its controversy, I think St Kilda take their, they take the 4 points and they hold their heads up high, because this is a game that Sydney really needed to capture in order for them to kind of turn their fortunes around. And we know that they've had injuries with McCartan and everything else, both McCartans actually, coming out of their defensive structure when they have played such a pivotal role over the past couple of seasons. Tom McCartan obviously doing it a few seasons before Paddy arrived to the club. It's just really weird seeing all of these instant drop-offs happening. Sydney was regarded as one of the best teams in the comp last year, made it to the grand final, got absolutely walloped, and it's almost like they've retreated back into their shell, and some of the players aren't delivering to the best of their capabilities, whereas on the other hand, St Kilda have nothing to lose. They just keep rolling the dice and they keep getting the job done, and you've got to take your hats off to them. Bulldogs hosted Port Adelaide at Marvel Stadium in a game where I was convinced Port Adelaide would continue their winning streak, and that's exactly what they did. Again, a game that I really felt at one point looked to be on the line. Bulldogs really had a run at one point that made me feel that they had the capabilities of getting, things back on their level. But Port Adelaide, they're looking really good this year. And let's not forget, Port Adelaide is a team that I predicted to not even make the top 8 this year. I had them finishing either 9th or 10th. I thought they'd drop off, and they have come out like a fucking powerhouse this year. Again, I have said it unfortunately over recent weeks though, and I'll still reiterate. We have seen Port Adelaide so many times in recent years perform so incredibly well in the home and away season and then drop the ball when it comes to finals. So, again, I will say it again. The measuring stick for this club is how far they get into September action. When it comes to the AFL finals, do they knock on the door of the grand final? Is it going to be one of two teams, being Port Adelaide, standing tall on the last day of the AFL calendar year? If they can make it that far, they get a tick from myself. Until then, and it might seem a little bit harsh, but we've seen, during the runs that we've seen Port Adelaide have, they make it to the finals, they might win a final or two, but then it comes to the final step to get to that grand final and they fall short. And until they can break the monkey off their back in that sense, I don't know where we can stand with assessing their year. Don't get me wrong, they're having a really good year home and away wise, but I think for them to take the next step forward, it needs to be assessed on where they have fallen short in recent years, and that's executing when it comes to the finals. The Bulldogs, on the other hand, all of a sudden went from being a top 5, top 4 team to now slipping down the ladder and looking ominous in the fact that they might even miss the top 8 this year, which I've started questioning and scratching my head over, because I've seen so many people on social media saying that they need a better midfield. People are saying Bulldogs need a better midfield, and I'm thinking to myself, in what realm do the Bulldogs need a better midfield? They've got Marcus Bontempelli, they've got, Tom Liberatore, they've got Bailey Smith, Jack McRae running both out of the forward line and in the midfield, Caleb Daniel coming from defence into the midfield. You've now got the young mix of kids that are coming in as well, and I know there is a disparity between their A grade players and then their B and C grade players, but on paper, Bulldogs have one of the best midfield structures in the competition. I don't think that's where they're falling short. I feel where they're falling short is their forward line. I feel isn't as consistent enough as it should be, and defensively they leak a little bit more than they should, and their defensive efforts aren't up to par. And I think if you could isolate one component from this game to express that lack of defensive pressure, it's when Jason Horne-Francis is inside 50, he manages to scoop up a ball and not only make a full 180 turn to turn from having his back to the goals to facing the goals dead on, he loops not one, not two, but 3 Bulldogs players who have no intent on putting any pressure on that ball or the player at all, and allows him to slot a goal, which at that point in time puts a little bit of space between Port Adelaide and the Bulldogs and gives them a comfortable lead. And at that point in time, when a game is on the line and is to be won, and 3 defenders allows a young kid who has been ostracized this season and, picked apart for some lack of defensive running and pressure himself, do something like that, question marks need to be put up. But putting all that aside, Port Adelaide looked fucking good. Hawthorn hosted Brisbane at the MCG. And every week so far this year, there has been a team that has really risen to the occasion and has caused an upset that nobody saw coming. And this weekend gone, it was Hawthorn upsetting Brisbane. And when I did my tips, even though last week I didn't get a video out, if you're unaware, there's some stuff going on in my life right now. I took a break away. I did post on my community tab my tips, and I locked in Brisbane with the footnote that Brisbane need to break the hoodoo of not being able to win at the MCG consistently. And until they can get the ability to win convincingly away from home, even though I predicted them to win the flag this year. I think that window keeps, swinging from being ajar to then slamming shut, and it's their own fault, really. We had a game where Brisbane should have done an absolute number on this young Hawks team. But the Hawks are finding a way to just dig deep and really put out some inspiring football. And it's just really good to watch, even from a neutral perspective. Like, I'm a Richmond supporter, so I wasn't invested hugely in this game. But I do make a genuine effort to watch every game of, every round. I just love football. I live it, I breathe it. And seeing this team, who I have said might not find instant success, but once they hit their straps in a few years' time, collectively they're going to be damaging, we continue to get a taste of what that is going to look like. And even though they're not going to have players like Luke Bruce in their system by that time, there might be another handful of players that have left by that period as well, be it through trade or free agency or retirement. This young team is really starting to come together, and it shows that when a team builds up enough momentum and feeds off of a crowd's energy, they are very unstoppable. They become a juggernaut. Very similar to Richmond feeding off of the Tiger faithful in the crowd. Very much like Collingwood feeding off of the Collingwood death rattle that goes around a crowd when Collingwood gets that lead and they start doing the Collingwood chant. The Hawks have nothing to lose. And they're a club, again, ostracised and accused of tanking to pick up the number 1 pick this year. And I feel since those accusations were made public and Sam Mitchell addressed it, this club has really knuckled down and said, hey, we're being pigeonholed into, people believing that we're not good enough, that we're throwing games, that we're, making active decisions to lose. And they have really come out with a fire lit underneath them. And even when they have lost, they have still played really good football. So I really take my hats off to the Hawthorn boys. However, it's not without controversy, as I said this week. And the big story coming out of this game was the tackle that Sicily laid on McCluggage. And the outcome of that tackle, I feel, again, was more horrendous than the tackle itself. Sicily was lying on the ground and pivoted McCluggage in a way that he rolled him over the top of him. Some have argued there's a dumping motion there. I personally feel there may have been. I think there is a fine line. I think rolling a player over the top of you might slow momentum down. Tyler Brockman did come over the top and knock into McCluggage's back, but I feel that didn't impact the outcome of this tackle. McCluggage's head was dumped into the ground, whether or not that was the intention of the tackle or not. He was knocked out on impact. You could see it, and he could barely move on his own. Once he got lifted up by the doctors, he was staggering. He looked out of it. It was very bad to watch. It very much reminded me of when Tom Stewart cleaned up Dion Prestia not too long ago. It's just, when I see players, after a collision or whatever, just in that state, it's rather sickening to see. You never want to see a player hurt. And Sicily, on the back of copping a 1-week suspension for a hip and shoulder on a player, head high, I think it was Caminiti from St Kilda he copped. He served that 1 week. He went to the tribunal tonight to try to fight the charge because he was sent straight to the tribunal for this tackle. Unsuccessful in turning it over. Will serve a 3-match suspension unless they decide to challenge, and I don't think there is going to be strong enough of a realm for them to appeal and be successful purely because of the outcome. And we know the MRO, I had to pause for dramatic effect there, the MRO are big on outcome versus action, and they punish outcome over action, which I think is something that needs to be taken out. I think the action needs to be, punished, and then the outcome is additional X amount of weeks on top if there is an outcome from it. I don't know what's worse though. Sicily having to sit out 3 weeks, or the Brisbane fans having to endure the fact that they've got one of the best teams on paper in the entire competition who seemingly struggle to win away from home. Adelaide hosted West Coast at Adelaide, and that's pretty much it for that game. No, but seriously, they won to the tune of over 120 points. 122 to be exact. The biggest score scored by any team this year, followed by the biggest winning margin that Adelaide have had in a very long time. It might even be ever. Followed by Tex Walker kicking a career high 10 goals. He has never kicked a double-figure goal haul in his career. In game 250, out-kicks the entire West Coast team off his own boot and manages to now sit amongst the Crow elite, the legendary Crows that have played before him, as I think 3rd overall now for the biggest amount of goals scored. He overtook Tom Lynch, who has had a 10-goal haul, I think, before. So he ties Tom Lynch, actually. So this game, very much for Adelaide, wasn't just a huge momentum-building game, wasn't just a huge individual effort from Tex, but collectively, while the competition is talking about how good Collingwood are and how good Port Adelaide are, Adelaide again still showing they deserve to be in the conversation, and I still feel Adelaide are the dark horse for this year's premiership. I feel there is a very... it's hard to put into words, but you can just see how inspired these boys are and just how effective they are in clicking, and the chemistry, that's the word I was looking for, the chemistry that the Adelaide boys have, especially given some of these kids haven't played together for that long amount of time. You know, this is a club that has gone through a rebuild in the essence of bringing young kids in versus clubs that have traded in big names like Richmond have, and like Collingwood have, like Melbourne have. You know, this is a team that, while they might have picked up a player or two through trade, and I feel Dawson and Rankin have been 2 of the best trades they have ever made, these young kids are really stepping it up. And we link back to teams like the Bulldogs, who you feel there's a disparity between their top tier players and then their next tier. Adelaide, I feel there are so many players in the B tier and the C tier that consistently enough play their role that the disparity isn't that marginable. And as much as I am a Richmond man, and, you know, I've got feelings towards Adelaide from the 2017 grand final and the build-up and everything else, you've really got to respect what the Crows are doing and how the Crows are playing. And then on the flip side, we turn attention back to West Coast. More injuries out of this game, even though we had some players come back from injury. Nick Naitanui officially has been ruled out for the rest of the year. I'm still left without words. There needs to be an internal look at this club, and as I said on the weekend watching this game, again watching it with my dad, I turned to him and I said, you know, if they've hired a new head of fitness this season, they need to get rid of that person because they have failed to do their job with all these injuries that are happening. I feel Adam Simpson is a man who knows his time at West Coast is done, whether that be at the end of the year or whether they drop the axe sooner rather than later. Personally, my opinion, just take a leaf out of look how Richmond have gone the last 3 weeks. Hardwick obviously felt burnt out after 14 seasons and he wanted to bow out, and he bows out a Richmond legend. But since doing so, Richmond have come up against Port Adelaide and lost by 10 points, and then have beaten both GWS and Fremantle at their home grounds respectively, as a club who notoriously has not played well away from the MCG in recent years. A fresh face goes a long way, and I feel West Coast right now couldn't do any worse than saying to Simpson, thank you for everything you've done for this club, thank you for giving us a premiership, but I think it's time for us to part ways and get a new face in and see if there can be a little bit of a shake-up. That's just from a perspective of somebody who has seen change in their own team. It also turns attention to the fact that senior players at West Coast aren't stepping up and aren't leading by example. And, you know, when Yo is one of the only senior players in this team that really stood up and showed anything, it's rather alarming. You know, Shuey doesn't stand up. Gaff doesn't show up. Two of West Coast's best on the weekend were Ruben Jinby, who was a first-year player, and Ryan Marrick, who 10 days ago wasn't even in the AFL system, and within that 10-day period was drafted to West Coast team via the mid-season draft, and then debuted and kicked 2 or 3 goals, I think it was, on debut, and looked a likely player. I really do hope West Coast give him an extended contract beyond the 18 months that they serve as a mid-season draftee, because he's got a lot of talent, this kid. But it turns attention again when it's these young first-year players that are stepping up. Where's the senior leadership? Where's it breaking down? Is there more happening at this club than we realise? I don't fucking know. Fremantle hosted Richmond at Optus Stadium, and before I locked in my tips for this round, I had a look at how Richmond had performed in recent seasons at this ground, and Richmond either lost close contests or won rather convincingly by large margins. And I felt, given the last time these two teams played each other, which ended in a draw, which broke my heart, and the inspiring win we had against GWS, where after so long and struggling to win close games, we finally get over the margin by that singular goal kicked by Marlon Pickett, that I really thought we might have played ourselves back into a little bit of form and we could take it to Fremantle. Now, Fremantle had Jaeger O'Meara serving suspension and Sean Darcy obviously out with a hamstring. That also played into my decision to tip Richmond. Had Sean Darcy had played, I still firmly believe Richmond would have lost this game. As much as I love Toby Nankervis, he would not have been able to ruck solo or even with the help of Samson Ryan. The combination of Sean Darcy and Luke Jackson would have been too much for Richmond to overcome. That's just my personal opinion. But Richmond found a way and had me on the edge of my seat even at the end of this game, because once again it was a week where Richmond got up by as much as I think it was 36 points, and it got within to 2 kicks late in the game. I don't know what it is with Richmond. I don't know whether it's complacency of hitting a lead and just dropping off. I don't know whether it's, you know, we do really have a lack of defensive run in certain parts of the field. But that last quarter, even though Fremantle put on a rally, especially after Michael Walters got subbed in as the tactical sub, he kicked 2 goals and he was just everywhere. Some of the Richmond boys really took their game to the next level, especially Shea Bolton, who finished with 14 disposals alone in the last quarter. Defensive marking from a player that we don't often see doing it, taking the final mark of the game and draining the clock enough to kick the final goal of the game and get us over the line. Again, Richmond digging deep and finding a way, and it makes me proud to be a Tiger. I'm proud whether we win, lose or draw, as much as it breaks my heart to see us lose. And I've been jokingly saying every week, we're only 2.5 wins out of the top 8. We're only a win and a half out of the top 8. We're now only, you know, we're in a position where if we win this week, we're only 2 points away from being within the mix of the top 8. Always dig deep, always find a way, always keep the faith. I'm surprised that we have won games that have now put us ahead of teams like Carlton, who I thought would have a better year. It makes me feel proud. It makes me feel good. It makes me want to just get up in your fucking faces and show my scarf. But again, wasn't without controversy, because Ryan Mansell, young Ryan Mansell, contests for the ball, accidentally cops James Aish with a hip and shoulder to the head, which sent the headband flying up in the air. I'm not sure. I think he might have failed his concussion test. I'm not sure if he come back on. Some people were telling me that he did play the rest of the game. I don't remember personally seeing James Aish out there. But Mansell went to the tribunal directly from the outcome of the game. Failed to turn it over. He will serve 3 weeks as well. I feel Richmond have enough scope here to appeal on the basis of this was a football act in the sense that Ryan Mansell was competing for the ball, braced for contact as any player would, knowing that if they're going to be coming into a contest, if you don't protect yourself, you open yourself up for injury. Mansell was looking for the ball after the hit. I mean, the coach from Fremantle in the post-game press conference even turned around and said he felt for Ryan Mansell because it was something that, you know, the players are taught to do. It was unfortunate that he caught him high, but it was a football contest in a game where the game was very much on the line. There was only a couple of kicks in it, both players with intent to go for the ball. I think there is room for Richmond to challenge, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. Richmond, however, have had a really big week because on the back of 2 wins on the road, we get news that Basher Hooley has been in a very horrific accident which has left him in a really bad way in hospital. And I've heard reports on a shattered pelvis and other injuries related, and Basher Hooley to me is one of the most humble men to have ever played the game. He puts so many people and so much priorities ahead of himself, you know, with the Basher Hooley Foundation and all the multicultural work he does and bringing light to the Muslim community through football, and just the type of player he was and the leader he was. It is so saddening to hear that him and his family are going through this, so I hope he does recover from this and that his family and himself are okay. And then on the flip side of the scope, Marlon Pickett gets arrested and prevented from leaving Perth for alleged burglaries that happened between December 2022 and January 2023. And reports are now suggesting that up to $400,000 has been deposited into his bank account from these thieves, and that a vehicle used to do the thefts was registered or rented out via Marlon Pickett's name. I'm a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty. Even though Marlon Pickett does have a history as a young kid of serving time for burglary, it's no secret that prior to being drafted to the AFL, he served time, and he spent a long period of, you know, his freedom turning his life around. I'm not going to divulge any thoughts on this. I want due diligence to take its course. I do have personal opinions, but I'll keep them to myself. But it is saddening to see so many people thinking this is funny and making jokes out of it and making comments without, without being proven true, without giving him the chance to speak his truth. And Richmond have come out in support. He won't be playing this weekend against St Kilda, and I agree with that. But I think we need to allow him to fight this and allow Richmond to support him through this without passing any judgment. So we'll step away from that, but we'll finish up with fucking good win by the Tigers. North Melbourne hosted GWS in Tassie in a game where North Melbourne in some parts actually looked like they were going to get over the line. They actually were taking it to GWS, but again, a little bit of a drop off through the game opened the door enough for GWS to run through and do some damage. And again, though, a very good showing from North Melbourne and their youth. It shows that the kids that they are bringing in aren't just capable of playing football, but are very capable of banding together and turning this club's fortunes around moving forward. We're not expecting immediate change from this club, but we've definitely seen, even in their losses, steps forward in the way of intent. And even though they lost this game in the end quite convincingly, again, it was a game where the intent from the players was still there right up until the final siren. I think GWS just had a little bit of a fire lit underneath them from that close loss to Richmond the week prior in a game that they very much should have won. And I don't know where GWS sit in the mix, because for long periods of that game, North Melbourne were very much in control, and you would have felt that even though GWS have lost a couple of players on the off-season, their list is a lot stronger than North Melbourne's, and they really should have never been in a position where they had to fight hard to win this game. They should have, from the get-go, come out guns blazing. So, don't know where they sit, but they get another win. And I don't know whether that win is going to inspire anything moving forward, but I really think that they need to take each win as it comes, and when they do rack these wins up, it needs to light a fire for them to want more. Too many players from GWS I've noticed in recent weeks take a long time to get into the game, like Toby Green did against Richmond, or they never get into it at all and they play a hell of a lot of a less capacity than what they should be. And I feel Jesse Hogan is one of those players. He's a player that really needs to lift for this club and has been underperforming so badly, but I feel they're not really in a position to play anybody else in that role. Who do they bring in? I don't fucking know. Carlton hosted Essendon at the MCG. I think we should just leave it at that. I tipped Carlton. We should just end the video there. I fucking tipped Carlton. And Essendon just came out, and in the end, the deciding factor was Big 2 meter Peter. He comes back for his first game of the year, kicks 5 goals if you don't mind. Whereas at the other end, Charlie Curnow and fucking Harry Mackay, I don't think they even kicked 5 between them. It is still a forward line that is crumbling. And the big story this week that a lot of people are asking is it a coaching problem or a list problem? Now, this is a conversation I'm going to bring to you guys, and I would love to see what you think about it. But this is my take. How many coaches in the last 6 years have we seen Carlton bring into the club and then dismiss, and we haven't really seen much of a forward progression? We've seen the most progression under Michael Voss in last season, in the fact that they went from being near the bottom of the ladder to literally just missing out on finals, and they probably should have played finals last year. The expectation then was to make the 8. They're currently sitting in the bottom 4. Now, I feel you could sack Michael Voss tomorrow. That isn't going to turn Carlton's, structure around. Because this is a team that only laid 33 tackles for an entire game of football. And out of those 33, half of those were laid in the first quarter alone. I think they only laid 17 tackles collectively for 3 quarters of football, which is a huge number considering Essendon had a lot of the ball. So Carlton had plenty of opportunity to lay tackles, and some players just had no defensive pressure for Carlton at all. The biggest breakdown for them, however, is their forward line structure, and we have spoken about this many times. Harry Mackay competing for other people's ball is ridiculous. He needs to stop getting in the road of every other player in that forward line and let something click. I can't count how many times a player from Carlton was just about to take a clean pluck, and then Harry Mackay comes over the top to try and take it himself. I think that's a very selfish demeanour. I think somebody still needs to tell him to stop fucking taking snapshots on goal within the forward 50 arc. Oh. I'm getting worked up over Carlton, and I'm not even a fucking Carlton supporter. And the round ended off with Melbourne hosting Collingwood at the MCG for the King's birthday clash. Fight MND was big. Obviously, every year we have the slide now to promote motor neuron disease and raising money to help Neil Danaher's charity. Very hard to see how much this has affected Neil Danaher and the fact that he's now struggling to talk and he can't use his arms. But the game really lived up to expectation, and I really felt Collingwood were going to upset late, because this was a game where, even though Collingwood came out the gates, Melbourne had momentum for a lot of this game. 3 goals clear at one point. I thought it was game over. And within the final 3 or 4 minutes of the game, Collingwood managed to pile on a couple of goals and come within a kick with 30 odd seconds left. I thought it was a game that was going to come down to the wire and have Collingwood win by 2 points. Unfortunately, they were defeated. And after a long period of time on a very hot streak, Melbourne knocked Collingwood off their perch, and they now sit equal first on the ladder with Port Adelaide as opposed to a win in front. However, even the commentary team was saying prior to this game, if Collingwood are to drop any games, this is now the time to do it, because you don't want to be still sitting, 20 odd wins in a row down the line and not having dropped a game early. And we saw it happen to Richmond in the year where they had that incredible run, and then we ran into Collingwood in the prelim and got absolutely rolled. Better to lose now than to lose come September, and I think this loss is actually going to hold Collingwood in better stead. A lot of people now are saying, now that Melbourne's knocked Collingwood off, does this make Melbourne the flag favourites? No, it does not. I still feel Collingwood still very much has one hand on the premiership. Melbourne can contend for the premiership, but I don't think they're now favourites. I still think Collingwood lead that quite convincingly. So unfortunately, I had a very bad tipping round. I only managed 4 correct tips. However, 5 correct tips was the most tipped in the competition for this round, so I actually didn't do too bad. So to the handful that tipped 5 correct and managed to tip the most correct this round, congratulations to the Blooper Reel, Saintly 12, Roxburgh, James F. and Marshall, Matt Lamb 24, Muddafarkers, who just happens to be my old man, and Nado. When we turn attention to who is leading the competition, congratulations still goes to Rockstar Pool 69, my brother over the ocean in England, who is sitting on 78 tips total. Nipping at the heels, we have Eagles Macon and Saintly 12 with Benny Craig, and then Frio 90 Courtney rounding out the top 5. I think I am currently just out of the top 10. I'm knocking on the door. I'm sitting in 15th place. I'm only 2 tips out of the 10. I'm only 6 tips out from the lead. I need to start doing something to get up there. Maybe this week could be a week where I shake things up a little bit, huh? Thursday night football is back, and I'm so glad, and it is kicking off at Adelaide Oval with Port Adelaide taking on Geelong. I don't think Port Adelaide drop a game to Geelong here. They are going to win by 14 points. This, however, is a round where I have heard players like Patrick Dangerfield and Mitch Duncan are very much in line to be coming back for Geelong. So Geelong are now starting to get these players that have been injured and now the team back. Could be big for turning their season around, considering they're currently sitting in 9th. But I think Port Adelaide is playing too good a brand to be knocked off, especially at home. The Gabba on Friday night sees Brisbane take on Sydney, and I'm locking in Brisbane, because if there's any sureties in this competition, you always back Port Adelaide at home, you always back Brisbane at home, unless you feel the team can really cause an upset. And I think Geelong are more of a chance to cause an upset against Port Adelaide than Sydney are even close to knocking off Brisbane, especially the fact that Sydney laid down and let St Kilda run all over the top of them by the end of this, this past week gone. Brisbane need a win here. They need to salvage the wreck that happened in round 13, because I'm still scratching my head as to how they dropped that game against Hawthorn. GWS hosts Fremantle at Giants Stadium, and this is a tough game for me. This is in my opinion the biggest 50-50 game of the entire round, because I feel Fremantle could travel down and do some damage. I do know, however, Sean Darcy will miss this game. He will potentially come in the following game for Fremantle. I'm going to tip GWS. This could be a game, however, that I change my tip for, but currently I like GWS at home. MCG, Richmond, St Kilda. I'm going to lock in the Tigers. I feel we're building momentum. We have just beaten GWS and GWS, Fremantle in Fremantle, back home at the MCG. I really think this plays into our hand. Had this been at Marvel, I probably would have gone with St Kilda. But I think Richmond, even without no Marlon Pickett this week, potentially no Mansell, we have some players, some young players even in the wings that are going to get opportunity with those outs, and I feel the young kids that have been given opportunity for Richmond have risen to the occasion. So I have firm belief my boys can get it done against the Saints. MCG, Sunday, Carlton, Gold Coast. Oh, this one's hard. I'm going to go Carlton because I feel defensively they'll only be able to shut down either one of Curnow and Mackay. I don't think they shut down both. The fact that they've got a two-pronged attack is going to hurt Gold Coast, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility of seeing Gold Coast come down and get a win here, especially with the brand Carlton's been dishing up. And the rounds out at Marvel with North Melbourne taking on the Bulldogs. And the Bulldogs are going to win this one quite convincingly in the end. So my tips for round 14... Port Adelaide, Brisbane, GWS, Richmond, Carlton, and the Bulldogs. Thank you very much for joining me for another video. These have been getting a little bit more long-winded, but what I'm going to be doing moving forward, especially if I do get the AFL-based YouTube channel that I want to get up for next season running, I will be separating those videos in the future into a round recap video earlier in the week and then a tipping video later in the week. But while they're getting done here on my gaming channel, they're going to be combined into one because obviously attention here is focused more so on the gameplays I'm putting out. So I think you guys understand what I'm saying. Do thank you guys for joining me today. If you did enjoy, do leave a like on the video. Be sure to hit subscribe if you are new around here as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. Good luck to your teams this weekend. And as always, I will catch you guys next time.